You're listening to the Bourbon and Balance podcast, where we discuss fitness and the finer things in life with the people who find balance between both.
Is that Bourbon and Balance? Can you say it?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bourbon and Balance podcast, season 2, episode 3 with Joe Cebulski. We have decided we're just going to pronounce everyone's name wrong. So,
except you just pronounced it right.
I pronounced it right, but
in the original
old-fashioned.
Polish. You just
the
nailed
Polak
it.
ways. What is the actual way to say it? Is it Cebulski? Is it like a
Cebulski.
CH?
Yeah, C-H-E-V. Cebulski.
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 It sounds
Like
Russian when you start saying.
Well,
But it's
they're
not
all
good
pretty
to call.
close.
Like
yeah,
it's not
Slavic.
It's not right to call.
Grandma was Ukrainian.
Okay, all right. So it's almost Russian.
She was hot.
Oh. What a way to start. My grandma was hot.
Is that what we're going to call this one?
Cebulski. That should be the title.
Yeah,
Joe's grandma was
last week
hot.
was more than a fart. This week is grandma was hot. Oh boy. Oh boy.
Last week we started with the story about
It's like just
Tully
clickbait.
having an accidental fart poop.
Yeah.
And now we're starting off with your grandma being attractive.
Sweet. We get to talk about me sharting 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, we're at 8th day. We're recording. We've been wanting to do a second episode with Joe for a while because
You are the champ, you know that?
yeah,
Still
Other
reigning.
season 1
other
reigning
than
champ.
our intro episode, you are the most listened to person.
Well,
Must
it's a lot to
feel
live
great.
up to with
you
season
beat
2.
Jordan Sy and Hunter McIntyre.
Yeah,
That's not.
that's not too
That's
bad.
not that hard
Those
to
guys
do.
are schmucks.
Hunter's not very interesting. He's very boring. He just sits there.
Yes,
doesn't
yeah,
say anything.
relaxed
Very
guy.
boring,
We
Pretty
couldn't get him to
tame,
talk.
honestly. Yep.
Yeah, so we did like a general overview. If you haven't listened to that episode and you're listening to this one, I would listen to that one first because it gives a good background on Joe's history as an athlete and as a business owner and kind of where 8th Day came from and all of that. We're going to dive a little bit more into basically just the life of an Olympian or, you know, an Olympic training athlete. Primarily focused around track and field, but probably branching off into other sports as well because there's a lot of connections that you came into contact with just through the American athletes and outside of American athletes as well.
It was
Actually,
episode
also
14,
was Joe's.
May 17th
Really?
last year.
That's kinda
Episode
cool.
14. We could have just done it.
Coming up on the year anniversary.
No,
yeah.
we could've.
We blew it.
I also want to we talked, I don't know if I've talked to you about this yet, but I watched Icarus for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
And Joe and I started having conversations about that as well.
You said
and-
you didn't watch it, right? Because
No, I watched it.
Oh, you did watch it?
Sure.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I thought you said you didn't watch it because you would be so irritated watching it.
No, that was somebody else.
Yeah, someone
I
else
think.
said that on the
because that
Rogan
was like the
podcast.
Rogan
Oh,
podcast.
was it?
He was talking to, gosh, who was it? The wrestler.
Was it
wasn't
Jordan Burroughs?
Yeah, it was the
A
American
lot
wrestler.
of people have been talking about it, especially because he was on
Yeah,
the guy, the director.
yeah, the
was
director
on
of
it, so.
Icarus. If you haven't seen Icarus too, that it's a
Eye-opening.
phenomenal not podcast, but documentary.
Yeah, incredible. One of the best.
So what? I guess just to dive in, what was your start like into becoming an Olympic trained athlete?
Ooh, the start was extremely precocious. I guess it would start with the fact that I was in college, interested in track and field and decathlon, had just been playing baseball, and decided that track and field was what I wanted to do. And I remember came home for Easter, said, "Hey, Mom, Dad, I've joined the track team and I'd like to be an Olympian." And my parents are great. They're like, kind of taking this all in. They're like, "Okay, well, what are you going to do to accomplish that?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to buy tickets to the U.S. Championships and I'm going to go watch people compete in track and field." So that was kind of my modus operandus, like choose to be interested in something and then go to the highest level and see what it looked like.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I did. I went to in Indianapolis, Indiana, went to the U.S. Championships.
Did you go by yourself?
No, I had a booster friend from Taylor University that went with me who actually passed away about 6 months ago.
Oh, geez.
Scott Hutton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. He actually was from Indianapolis and went with me, and
Wow.
yeah, it would actually be someone who sponsored me for years afterwards. But sat in the stands, and I would go from event to event, and I'd watch the guys pole vaulting, and then I would look in the stands and see who was coaching who, and take it to the next level, and I would see who was winning the pole vault, and then I would see who was coaching that person, and I would kind of slide over in the stands, make my way over and sit down next to that coach, if not to eavesdrop and listen, but to eventually introduce myself and ask them if I could come and train with them that summer.
Some random kid from college. So did you do
Hey, my
this?
name is Joe. Can I just do workouts with you guys?
That's actually exactly what it sounded like.
I'm curious, like, did you follow this trend earlier in your life as well, like in other things that you were pursuing? Like, I know you're really into photography. So when you found photography and you wanted to get better at it, did you do the same? Like, did you have that same tactic of like find a really good photographer and then pick their brain on how they got to be?
I think I'm drawn towards knowledge. I'm drawn towards learning and understanding and finding whatever resources there are to figure that out. And obviously things have changed a lot in the last 20 years because you can do so much of that online. Yeah. The resources are incredible. Back when I was learning track and field, I had to go to the library and find VHS tapes that I could check out of the library.
You know what that is? VHS. Sounds like a disease of some sort.
Yeah. So I would check those diseases out of the library and take them home and watch them on television, and then I would take 2 VCRs, and this was actually illegal to do. This was considered like bootlegging. I would take 2 VCRs and I would copy the footage from the tapes over to another one and make video tapes that I could watch to try to learn the track and field events. So yeah, that makes me feel really old.
Yeah, sure.
Which I guess I am getting there, but so I would literally walk up to these coaches and say, "My name is Joe. I would like to learn how to pole vault. Would you teach me?"
Nice.
And they would often chuckle or kind of, look me up and down and try to figure out who the heck this kid was. And they would ask me, well, how are you pole vaulting now? And I would say, well, I haven't yet, but I would just really like to. And that would also lead to more laughing. But I think for some reason, the earnest and precocious nature of it led a lot of those coaches to say, sure, that's fine. And I was great. I would be like, I would like to pay you for it, and I don't expect this to be free.
Yeah.
At least they weren't just like big timed you and were like, can somebody get this kid away from me?
Yeah.
Track and field is fascinating that way. I think that track and field is interesting in its openness to knowledge sharing, and people have that accrued abilities and knowledge that they've gotten over the years, and it's enjoyable to share it.
I think that a lot of the Olympic sports that are more like individual based are that way, because Olympic lifting is the same way.
Yeah.
And
like you think of like Fred, like when we interviewed Fred, like any question we asked, he was so excited to answer.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it was like, no, like let's steer back this way, because he would just, start going and going and going with all of this knowledge. And you could tell he was having so much enjoyment just talking about it and being asked about it. I've noticed that just talking to you about track and field, like I know nothing about this sport. This is a sport that like literally growing up knew maybe 1 or 2 of the events that, the track athletes would do at school. But anytime I ask about it or I'm curious about it, like, you can just tell that you're excited now at that point to talk about it and to explain it and the ins and outs and all of that stuff. So
yeah, I think we call it a mountain climbing sport. Like if baseball and football and basketball are sports of fame, track and field and Olympic weightlifting are mountain climber sports. Mm-hmm. You're pursuing a goal to get to the top of a mountain, and you can climb that mountain with other people. Yeah. In fact, it's easier to climb the mountain with other people.
Much easier.
Interesting.
And you might be at different sides of the mountain, you might be at different points in the climb, but you're all still climbing the mountain together, and you can get there together. So in a weird way, even decathletes that I would compete against at Olympic trials, I often trained with and shared information with and went to Olympic Training Center and learned with. And we've formed friendships to this day, even though they are my competitors. Very strange,
that is
compared to other sports.
I wonder if that translates at all to CrossFit. I know some athletes are fine competing with others and like having a training partner who is also a competitor, but like a really close friend. I know Matt Frazier being on Joe Rogan just kind of like openly talked about how he wouldn't train with anybody, but he was a little bit different, and I'm sure there was athletes like that wouldn't train.
Lone wolves. Yeah, he's a lone wolf. Frazier.
Yeah, but I think it is a sport that translates into that same realm as like just people within the gym that are individual competitors, like they're technically competing against each other, but then they're also going to get the most out of their training if they are training with each other. So it's interesting.
I was at a dinner with all of the gold medalists from the United States of America in the decathlon. It was a Visa fundraising dinner. And so it was Rafer Johnson and Bruce Jenner and Dan O'Brien and all these guys that had won gold medals.
Caitlin, actually. But
now Caitlin. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. I just want to be politically correct. I'm just, don't want to.
At the time, it was Bruce.
Yep, that's true.
We're talking historically, young man.
I had to.
He's actually incredibly nice and kind and extremely interested in us as athletes compared to some of the other former athletes that were there that were wanting to talk about themselves. He was extremely kind. Wanted to know, like he was just off of competing and wanted to sit and talk and see what our day was like.
Oh, these are like competitors from past years as well, you're saying?
So these are all the gold medalists that were alive in the United States of America.
Wow, that's kind of wild.
In the decathlon.
In the decathlon.
That's sweet. That's really
pretty cool dinner, to sit around and talk with these guys. So there are 10 of us active decathletes, and then all these former gold medalists. And Rafer Johnson, who is kind of a man among men, barrier breaker, African American decathlete, won a gold medal. One of the older ones there, and he and I hit it off and talked. And again, I was always the wet behind the ears guy. I was new. I mean, from the day that I started the decathlon to the day that I went to U.S. Championships was like 4 years. From stepping on a track to ending up at U.S. Championships for 5 years, and even by the time I was at these kind of dinners, I was still in the neophyte stage of track and field. And so I think again, some of these guys got a kick out of me.
Yeah.
And I still had that kind of childlike love and passion for it.
Naive
excitement.
Sense to it almost. Yeah.
So Rafer and I got to talking, and he ended up sending me a letter. Rafer also passed away about a year ago, I think. But he had sent me a letter to my home several weeks after that dinner. And in that letter, he said a bunch of things of wisdom, but one of them was, do not have your goal to make it to the Olympics. Do not have your goal be to win a gold medal. Have your goal to become as good of a decathlete as you could possibly become. And if that coincides with Olympic Games or a gold medal, you can count that as a blessing. But your goal is to get as good as you possibly can. And I think Olympic lifters share that. CrossFitters share that. Performance sport people can understand that, where you can train with others and get better as a group, because you know that that's what's getting you to the highest point on that mountain that you can get to.
Sure.
And that's the ultimate goal. Yep. If people come along with you or they help you get there and you help them get there, there's no loss there. So
the goal is not to hide your secrets and your tactics and all these things. That's definitely the difference between performance sport and team sport.
Yeah, and we see that even in the CrossFit realm here with the gym. Human beings don't do as well with movement by themselves.
Yep.
We have been hunter-gatherers for long before we were here in the civilized slice of the timeline of the world, and I think that we naturally prefer to move about this planet and to pursue fitness together.
Yeah.
And that energy that builds with a group of people is far greater than you can by yourself.
I was walking some drop-ins around yesterday and just kind of showing them the gym and stuff, and the guy that I was walking around was talking about how he's having a difficult time because he's constantly having to train by himself and kind of going down that route of conversation. And I mean, I think just in general, like as athletes, as competing athletes here, we're blessed just to have other people competing in the same room as us or training in the same room as us. Maybe they're not necessarily even following the same program, but just being in that same space and having energy of another human with you is so much, I guess, more enjoyable than, being in a garage by yourself, listening to your own thoughts and not having anybody to kind of like communicate with, or even just like think that they're watching you so you go harder. Like, it's interesting. I'm not the type of athlete that would ever be able to train by myself.
Really? That surprises me.
Yeah.
Not at all.
I also just can't go 60 seconds without saying anything. So you also used a term earlier that I'm going to call you out on, wet behind the ears.
Oh yeah, that's right. We got the idiom for the day out of the way.
There we go.
On
Nice.
the podcast.
What, you can come in, Michael. Come on in.
Hey, reoccurring guest Michael Paas is going to join us.
Round of applause.
Michael Paas,
He hasn't been on in a while
Wet
either.
behind the ears. What is that? Are you looking it up right now? filibustering?
Yeah, I don't know this one.
It's funny that you were just talking about, the conversation with like training by yourself.
Yeah.
Because we just had that conversation yesterday. We had been trying to figure out why, when we came back from the shutdown this summer, I had more kids throwing up in workouts than I've ever had. Like, I never have kids throw up, and we were programming the easiest stuff we ever had.
Much easier.
And the biggest thing that we weren't taking into account was that all these kids were going from training by themselves to now training with their teammates. So even though we were prescribing things light, like kids were grabbing heavier bands they needed to grab, like all those kinds of things.
Then their output, their intensity output is so much higher when they're surrounded by, peers.
It also crosses with their perceived notion of their fitness, which training alone can be higher than it actually is. So they think they're fit, they show up to train with friends, the amplitude goes up.
Yes.
That's a bad combination.
That was always the crazy thing, is like seeing kids that we thought were like monsters, like on the side of the football field throwing up. Because those kids were definitely working out and they were probably in good shape, but they were just like getting through it like everybody else.
Fitness was much higher than
wet behind the ears. I would have never guessed. This is really interesting and gross. This is the drying of the amniotic fluid behind the ears of farm animals when they're born. So that baby animal is so new, he's still wet behind the ears. Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, gross.
I almost said it was something with a dog, but it's an animal, so maybe it is like a dog. Yeah.
Yep, there you go. Wet
Farm animals, wet behind the ears. That's disgusting.
So,
anyways,
idiom of the day.
So we travel through time now. You start reaching out to these coaches. You build rapport with them. You get invited to some of their camps or to some of their training facilities. You just show up
Hey, you're having a
with a
camp. It'd be great
lunchbox
if I
and
came to that.
a
Thank you.
backpack.
It was far less than that. I was literally like, hey, you live in Bloomington, Indiana. Can I come visit you this summer? And can you teach me how to throw the discus? It wasn't even a camp. This was just, can you coach the best discus thrower in the U.S. Can you teach me how? And I'd show up with a couple $100 in my pocket, and they would show me. Now, fortunately,
how'd you make money?
Selling golf balls in the summertime.
Really?
That I dove in the lakes and ponds of Egypt Valley Country Club here in Grand Rapids. And I would collect golf balls and I'd sell them on the side of the road.
There you go.
Yeah, made big money.
Really? I just bought golf balls off of a guy that does that now.
Yeah, so this was before that was a thing.
Yeah.
That now the country clubs like sell contracts to the golf ball
this
scuba
guy
divers.
has a contract.
Yeah.
And he doesn't go into the ponds though. He just collects them at the end of the year in basically like the roughs in the woods, and then
That's harder work.
separates all of them into dozens after cleaning them, and then sells them.
Exactly what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, and he does. I mean, I bought like 5 dozen Titleists for like $50.
Yeah. I do max flies for $1 a piece, but my Slazengers were more expensive.
So that's what got you.
So anyway,
money.
that's how I got the money to pay off these coaches.
Interesting.
And the cool part was I would show up and I was extremely teachable. I learned very, very quickly. That was one of my gifts, is proprioception and learning. And so they got excited pretty quick. Right?
Yeah.
A coach loves to see an athlete make change.
Sure.
And I was so raw, and I was like a blank, whiteboard, and I didn't have any bad habits and didn't have anything that needed to be erased.
Where did you stay? Like when you would go, would you
I'd get a hotel, or I'd just stay in my truck.
Gotcha.
And do that as well. I'd just sleep in the back of my truck.
Yep.
And so I learned quickly and improved quickly, and ended up training pole vault with Earl Bell, and that's where I would eventually move to train for years after
In
college.
California, right?
That was actually in Arkansas. I was outside of
Memphis,
Memphis, Tennessee.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's where I got my first experience with Olympians and what it looked like to be a world-class athlete.
Yeah, that's what I kind of want to dive into is, you're fresh out of college, you're, obviously like a really good athlete in pursuing this new sport, essentially. And now you're quickly climbing, like you said, that ranks from, amateur to the highest level. What do those athletes start to look like? Like in hockey, for example, the speed of the game changes. So when you go from high school to college, like the speed of the game is what you notice first, and adjusting to that, not necessarily the size of the athletes, but just how fast paced the sport becomes, is the main change. What were maybe physically, and then just like in general skill wise, what were some of the things that start changing when you get into that realm of professional?
I've never thought about it that way. The main difference, and this is where it's going to be different in other sports, I wasn't pole vaulting like against them, right? Like I was watching them do their pole vaulting.
Yeah.
The main difference is the body of knowledge that they possessed. You walk into the room and start talking to them, or they start, sharing, how the workout went that day and talking about what things they're going to do and change. And it's more akin to having basic mathematic knowledge and then walking into a graduate level PhD quantum physics class.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's what it felt like sitting in a room being like, oh my gosh, I run down there and I jab this thing into the box and jump over. They're literally talking about the proprioceptive feel in their left thumb, at the second moment of fulcrum of the plant phase when their right foot is, 90 degrees to their, and you're just like, what?
Like, huh?
Speaking a whole nother language.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah. And then three
And
other
then you
people
have
are
that
jumping
for
in.
10 events.
Sure, then that's probably what I loved about it, though. I love overwhelming projects and ideas and concepts. So yeah, I had that for 10 events. But yeah, so that's the first thing, is their incredible body of knowledge that they had at that level, and then secondly, their execution and the way they lived their life was amazing. Like everything about their life was formed and scheduled and written around what they needed to do to accomplish their goals. And that's a secondary big wake-up call of like, you have no idea what you're doing. Like, you don't even know how to sleep right.
Really?
Yeah, that's interesting, because like with 10 events, you can essentially just train all day, every day.
You're not
doing
running
different
out of
things,
things
like-
to train.
I mean,
Yeah.
an hour of training for each event could potentially be, a full day by itself.
Decathlon's
Obviously,
unusual.
you wouldn't do that, but
When you look at decathlon, again, this would be a good example. When I looked at it, I saw 10 events. My first great coach looked at it and saw 3 regions.
yeah,
Speed,
that's what I was going to
power,
say, is you break
technique.
it up. Yeah.
Yeah, so a day, they would be training speed. Well, that speed covers 100, the long jump, the hurdles, the pole vault, right? Like,
Still helps with development with the shot or the discus.
sure. Yeah, when you're training power, you're training the discus, the shot, the javelin, the high jump.
So you didn't necessarily train like specifically for each event. I'm sure you did at certain points throughout the season or leading up to an event, but you trained in regions, like you're saying?
Yeah, so you'd train acceleration development and speed development of your running mechanics and your velocity capacity. That covered all these events.
Yeah.
Now you had technique of the hurdles. You had to do hurdle technique.
Yeah.
So you had power training for the throws. You would literally, we were throwing everything. We threw everything you could throw for power development.
Really?
And bounding and jumping. Well, that covered, but then you still had to throw the discus.
Yeah.
So technique and power strength, endurance, that training were separate. So the technique work would be when I was throwing discus, when I was pole vaulting, when I was throwing javelin.
Yeah.
But that probably wasn't the bulk of the day.
Just general development.
General development of speed, strength, power, and endurance.
Or just skip endurance, because it's bullshit.
That's exactly what we did.
Says the weightlifter.
Yeah, we did too. We didn't train for the mile. That was too far.
I mentioned that in class the other day. I used that as an analogy for warming up. We had a short sprint workout, and I made the analogy that the shorter the workout, the longer the warm up. And I talked about how you guys didn't warm up for technically your longest event, right? The mile.
We warmed up for it.
With all of the other events.
No, so we trained for the
Or
mile
maybe didn't train.
with the 400.
Yeah, okay.
So we never trained for any long distance running. We trained up to the 400 meters, because everything in the decathlon is power speed based, smaller than 400.
Yeah.
And there's one event that's a mile. But that's different than warming up for it. We warmed the heck up for it.
So you didn't train at all to run 4 times the 400? Like, a mile is 4x what a 400 is. How do you not train for that and still do well?
It hurts excruciatingly bad.
But because
during
it's the last
mile.
event,
It's the last event.
Screw it.
It's a guts event.
Yeah.
So the amount of benefit we could get for training for it, like let's say we trained a bunch for the mile, the benefit we'd get in seconds that we would drop in the mile, and everything was worth points off a scale, a book that we could look at and see how many points it's worth. The amount of benefit we could get in points from the mile, which wasn't a highly valuable event, was not worth putting out in that much time that would deter from our 100 and our long jump and our hurdles.
So it's pulling points from
points
other
away.
events.
Yeah, you can't have your cake and eat it too. In that realm, not at that level of performance. CrossFit's changed that a little bit, but
is that how all decathletes approach that, or was that just like
at the national world class level? Nobody's training for the mile.
Trains for the mile.
No.
That's so
Wouldn't be
interesting.
I had no idea. Yeah, I would
didn't
assume,
either.
especially seeing, like Matt Frazier be able to do so well on the trail run and then immediately pull whatever, like a 605 deadlift or whatever
but
it was.
Those guys, they don't know how to run. CrossFitters don't know how to run. Like, so you're comparing apples to oranges. That's very different than trying to get on a track and run a 420 mile, which is what I ran, and I wasn't even the
420,
fastest.
swag.
Blaze. That was my world ranking. 420.
Nice.
Also, weed day. April 20th.
Sorry.
Yeah. So
Joe
okay,
just
so
jumped
that's
on a podcast with a couple children here.
I wondered what all the blue haze was here.
What a guy.
Okay. So do you think that you had mentioned this just now? Do you think CrossFitters would benefit from learning how to run properly?
It's amazing to me that CrossFitters spend as much time as they do learning Olympic lifting technique.
Yeah.
And then you look at the World Championships of CrossFit and how much running is in it. It's literally like a large percentage of the events include running.
Yeah.
And how little training, if none at all, they have in running
I think they're
mechanics.
getting in, like the individual pros are now getting into that realm of like tapping into that knowledge base, but it's definitely not.
It's hard though because everything to qualify never contains running almost at all.
True.
Yeah.
I mean, regionals
so I think
might
it
have had
becomes
some
that
running,
balancing act of like,
how good am I? How much do I have to double down on the stuff to get there?
and like how much time are you able to distribute to everything else that you're working on?
Yeah.
So maybe it's also similar to how not training for the 400 or for the mile was allowing you to do better in other areas of the 10 events. Whereas your knowledge or as your time for learning how to run might be taking away from learning how to do better things, or like
unless you're in the top 10 and you want to win,
Yeah.
then running would become an extremely important thing to do regardless.
especially
Because you know
if
you're going to make it. To the
Yeah,
World
if you know you're going to qualify and you know you're going to have to be running, especially like the distances that the games puts them through.
So imagine, Tully, like you, imagine going to the CrossFit World Championships and watching all of the athletes do their Olympic lifts, the ugliest Olympic lifts you've ever seen, and they're doing like 30 of them in a row, like a first day Olympic lifter.
Like the 2013 CrossFit Games.
Yeah, so gross.
And you show up and you're like, wait, these are the best in the world, and this is how they are doing their Olympic lifts? Well, that's how I watch it as a runner. I'm like, wait, these are the best in the world, and this is how they're running around the track with their feet sticking out to the sides, their hips behind them, and their posture terrible, and their foot strike in front. Like, so you would see efficiency gains that could be made, and that's obviously it, but that's another whole nother topic.
Sure. No, that makes sense though. And especially if it's like, if there's still within the sport low-hanging fruit for these athletes to just be able to make quick fixes on, like that, it's not going to take a ton of time for them to learn that kind of stuff.
Sure.
It's probably what those coaches seeing you first come in saw, like, hey, this guy like does all right with this and he's not good at it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like I can't imagine what it would be like for a coach. Yeah. Same idea, like coming into a CrossFit gym, like, hey, I'm local runner Joe. I did marathon running at the highest level or whatever. Do you want your CrossFit athletes to do some running training with me? And a lot of people will probably say no because running is not fun.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the audience that you're trying to pitch to. But so you get into, let's just maybe go from, where was your first, like, I guess, residency as an athlete?
That was at Arkansas.
Bell?
Yeah, that was at Bell Athletics. I decided that the pole vault was the hardest event in track and field. In track and field and in the decathlon.
Okay.
And therefore, why not go there to master? This was the great, naivety as well. Go there, I'll master that, and then I'll move to somewhere else for the next events that I need to learn. Kind of this idea of moving to the coaches.
Yeah.
And it ends up you don't master pole vault in a couple of years.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult event. So I lived there for years. I ended up getting a coaching job at the university, which is always synergistic for track and field athletes because that gets you access to a track and facilities and
and money.
Yeah, and a little bit of money and just traveling to events and it's always a nice synergistic partnership. So got that job, met a throws coach. That was really good. So I had a few pieces of the puzzle together. And, I was able to go from entering the world of track and field to gaining some world-class status while living there at the pole vault facility.
And how long did you live there for?
Ended up being there for 7 years.
Wow.
Is that what ended up being your like biggest like gain, like from your first few competitions to at your best? Like what were the things that you went from like your lowest scores to like your highest scores? Like what was the biggest margin of increase for you?
Yeah, I mean, certainly pole vault, right? I mean, I think I jumped like 9 or 10 feet in the pole vault, my first ever track and field meet, and then I would eventually jump.
That's what like high schoolers, same idea.
High school girls.
Yeah, you like.
Oh, really?
Get up there, pole doesn't bend at all, and you like just spin around and like throw it and fall.
Yeah.
I did pole vault.
Helicopter. Yeah.
Did you really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow, what a guy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's same here. Yeah, I jumped like as high as my daughter did yesterday in the high school meet in her first time pole vaulting. She and I jumped about the same, but then eventually I jumped 17 feet in the pole vault.
Almost doubled it.
Pretty big gain.
Oh my gosh.
And like getting above like, I think I remember.
Is it 14 is like the in college is like the really good number? What's like a?
I felt like that was in high school. The guys.
Like a D1 college.
Like 12.6 is
athlete.
Minimum qualifying for a D2 state championship.
That's also a moving target, right? Pole vault's seen a lot of gains in the last decade
Just
too.
with technology?
Just with
skill.
Progress.
Yeah.
As sports do. It's made a ton of progress.
And knowledge being available.
Yeah.
That's what our pole vault coach at Granville says, that like the internet is amazing because you can get a hold of all these people that are just like, hey, here's these free drills that I do with my athletes. And like somebody who was an average pole vaulter can be an amazing coach if they just continuously.
So no VHS tapes.
Apparently
a
not.
lot easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's been a lot of progress. Yeah, in that.
What's the world record right now? Do you know?
Didn't we
Mondo
watch it?
Duplantis.
Or we like it happened like a year ago, not that long ago.
Yeah, not that long ago. Yeah, Mondo Duplantis, a youth phenom, broke it at 20 foot 2 3/4, something like that.
I remember our coach showing us VHS tapes of Sergei Bobka.
Yeah,
right.
He was the man,
best guy for like forever.
Yep. Yeah. He pushed the sport of pole vault way beyond what anybody knew at that time. Like by feet, he was feet ahead of everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what my coach was, an All-American at Northwestern. He's a guy named Jim Fast. He was literally a Korean guy that was like in his late 40s, and he looked like he was probably like early 30s or maybe even 20s.
Really?
Like, man looked like he was going to live forever. And
Yeah.
he was like, like almost 50 and could still do like insane bounding jumps and like sprint faster than anybody.
Yeah.
He took immaculate care of himself. And he could still, when he was teaching us the pole vault, like just get up there and go. Like,
so speaking of taking immaculate care of yourself, I want to get into like what, because you eventually lived with a bunch of
so I eventually moved to
decathletes.
California.
Yeah.
Just athletes in general. It was
really?
Yeah, high
It
jumpers,
wasn't just decathlete.
sprinters, throwers. Yeah, it was everyone.
So they were specific to just those events, and then you were the.
Yep. So some of my buddies that I knew had kind of moved on. They were out in California and in Texas, and then this opportunity came to train with Dan Paff, who was the best track and field coach in U.S. history, one of the best. And that was going to happen out in California. So I got an invite to come out with that group and train. There was about 23 athletes.
How many decathletes?
Just me.
You were the only one?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah.
That's kind of neat.
Yeah. But I mean, I would go throw discus with the American record holder in the discus,
like
Susie Powell. I would high jump with one of the best high jumpers in U.S. history. I'd pole vault with the American record holder in the pole vault. So
it sounds a lot to me like the way a lot of MMA guys are handling their training now too.
Yeah,
like bringing in like world championship boxing coach, and then or like going and traveling to like the wrestling Olympic training center. That's what like George St. Pierre did that for a long time with Canada. Is he would go to the wrestling training center, and then be an MMA guy,
and
karate guy that would just hold his own just as well.
Try and surround yourself with all of the, the best in the world of each facet of that sport.
And which brings us back around to what makes people the best in the world is capacity to learn. Mm-hmm. There wasn't a single dumb Olympian I ever knew. They were brilliant human beings that were gifted at pursuing knowledge and learning and running their lives and their bodies like a business. A business that would become, one of the greatest businesses in the world, right? A gold medalist.
Yeah.
So that mentality, that mindset, you sit in a room full of people that are at that world-class level, it's dynamic and fascinating, and there's no small talk, and it's very, very high IQs and almost like a form of Asperger's, right? Nobody's speaking, blowing smoke up, each other's skirt. It's just it's the truth, and speaking honestly, there's no progress made from lying to yourself or to others.
Yeah.
It's just a very honest room.
Yeah, people probably think like perception from movies and media and stuff that like your throwers are gonna be like, I throw a big rock, like kind of guys. But like it's almost like 100% like throwers become amazing strength coaches. There's like all these throwers that obviously have to do a ton of strength work, and they have to do this very fine-tuned training program to get them to where they want to get to, and then they carry that over after their careers. I know so many former throwers that are brilliant strength coaches.
Because it needs to transfer, right? It's transfer of training in sport, right? It need the training that you do that's outside of your sport. Your hope is that it transfers to what you're doing. So if you're going to throw the discus far, whatever you train for power needs to transfer. That's where basketball and football and baseball, they've got so far to come in their learning and understanding because they don't understand how to transfer that to the court or the football field.
Yeah, sure. And that's always a weird thing that we juggle as well, like at the high school level, just with like the kids that I work with, is how much do they need just general preparedness and how much do we actually need like special preparedness, specific preparedness, because a lot of the kids haven't done anything. So it can be difficult. I feel some of those coaches on there, like figuring out, one coach to like, the NCAA, like Olympic sport level, a lot of those coaches are like less than $30,000 paid GAs that are trying to figure out this incredibly complex puzzle.
Yeah.
But it is always amazing how like, athletes who have competed at the highest level in track and field seem to like pick that up better than most sport.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you're the CEO and the president of your company, right? At the end of the day, you hire a coach, and hire in quotations. I mean, you work with a coach in a group that you believe in, and you think their training philosophy is the best. At the end of the day, it's you. You're making the decisions on how that business runs and how it sleeps and how it eats and how it trains. So, those group of Olympians are dynamic, incredible, creative human beings in general. I mean, I could begin to list all the different projects and building things and ideas and inventions that came out of those groups, because that's how their minds work. They solve problems and come up with creative solutions.
I would bet that, like the top 1% of any sport, for the most part, those athletes are probably pretty intelligent. I mean, to get to, and I know that there's probably like outliers and whatnot, but even in a sport like, let's just say football, like a wide receiver, the best wide receiver in the world has to have some, intellectual level higher than the people that he passed for the most part, because it's not just easy to get to that level. Mm-hmm. Like there's a lot of learning that has to go into it. There's a lot of self-discipline that has to go into it. And then just like the act of being able to ask for help and learn from other professionals in order to get better at your profession, I think it wouldn't be easy for somebody with a low IQ to be able to do that kind of stuff.
Sure. I would agree with that. I think the difference in a performance sport is that you're not competing against another team or athlete, so you can't fake them out on the field and score a touchdown. You're competing against history. Yeah. You're competing against time and gravity and weight. And it's an extremely brutal judge. And so the honing of that sword towards a performance sport becomes the pinnacle of that example. So without a doubt, there are wide receivers that spend the whole week reviewing the coverage footage of the next team they're going to play. And they benefit from that. And so I would agree, only then saying that performance sport takes it to the ultimate level of hundreds and hundreds of, sometimes 100 years of breaking down a movement to throw something or jump over something or run a distance that everyone has been trying to do for a couple hundred years.
It's the same thing.
And then perfecting that and getting your body to perform at its absolute peak is a whole nother level of obsessive compulsive pursuit of a certain performance.
Yeah, I agree. And even just listening to, like we were talking about your daughter Rowan and how, she's still learning the sport of pole vaulting, and hearing you talk about the math behind it and the physics behind it, and how to get better at, the placement of the stick and the balancing of, as you're running, the velocity of the stick coming to the ground. And like you had said that the pole feels, not the stick, the pole feels like it's weightless at certain points if it's done correctly. That's a topic that is very difficult to understand and get better at if you don't have a certain IQ level in order to understand that in general.
I once spent an entire weekend on it was called the rotational kinematics of the pole vault.
Yeah.
It was an entire weekend presentation of the rotational kinematics of pole vaulting. In other words, how the human body rotates around the axis of a pole vault pole at the different phases. Yeah. And that was at the Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista.
It's wild.
Like 3 people presented on this.
Yeah, that's not like run down the field, cut left, cut right, catch a ball.
Correct.
That's much different than that. So I do.
And how much do you think that level of knowledge helped you? That's also another interesting thing that I feel like people at that level can take that much knowledge and process it, but a lot of other people that are average athletes or even like good athletes but don't break into the elite level are like paralysis by analysis from learning so much.
Yeah, there is a balance. I definitely recognized early on that my ability to become a world-class decathlete would probably hinge upon some capacity for knowledge and intellect. So I learned better than my competitors. They were better athletes than me, and I learned more than them. So that you can play that kind of warfare game of the mind, and I definitely fit in that category. But I will also never forget my throws coach, Dave Rodley, who said, as we were recruiting athletes, and he was kind of showing me the ropes of recruiting when I was coaching, and he was like, well, you got to make sure that you recruit people at the right IQ level, because if they're too smart, then you can't understand what they're saying, and if they're too dumb, they can't understand what you're saying, so you got to find them in the middle.
The balance. That's funny.
There's some truth there too.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's wild.
So living with all of these athletes, right? Like, what was that like? Because you guys have, these IQ levels that are really high. You have all, your body is your business, and you're treating that, essentially to perform at a world-class level. Like, what was sleeping like? What was eating like? What was like your daily routines like? And what were the differences between each one of those?
I mean, you can only
athletes?
control so many variables in performance. You have your sleep that you can control. You have your nutrition that you can control, and you have your training theory. Those are the 3 things you control, and then the largest component that you can't control is your genetics.
Sure.
Right? So you control those 3 that you can. So sleep was insane. If you're going to not cheat at sport, then sleep is your drugs. That is when the human growth hormone is produced, testosterone levels rise. Your body's natural hormonal levels are most influenced by how well you sleep. And hormonal levels influence how quickly you recover from the training stimulus that you gave yourself that day. So sleep is probably the primary. Secondary to sleep then is what materials do you give your body to do the rebuilding at night when you're sleeping. So the construction materials are the food that you're eating. So you're going to give yourself crooked nails and warped 2x4s, or you're going to give yourself,
Ryan did last night.
Best of the best. Okay, I had a few beers, okay? It wasn't like I was getting
and a
wasted.
cheeseburger.
Well, yeah, but that was made with grass-fed beef.
All right.
I'm just kidding.
So sleep. We all were sleeping on really nice beds and had done a lot of research to figure out what beds were the best beds for us to sleep on.
Yeah.
We were controlling temperature.
Did somebody have a
dramatically.
spreadsheet?
I was the guy. With
Yeah, I was gonna say, it was definitely Joe.
Definitely me.
The whole crew, like all the Olympians, like walk into, like an art van, and they're all just like, this one, I give it a 9 out of 10 for
yes.
support. And
I was lucky enough to be a fortunate fool and be training with the greatest, athletes in the U.S. and the bed makers were coming to them. I'll put it
Really?
that way. Yeah.
That's kind of how it is now, actually. Like all of these new, like athlete-driven mattress companies are now reaching out to CrossFit athletes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And saying, hey, use this. This will help you recover, but also, put it on Instagram and get it out there.
CrossFit is the most sleep-dependent sport on the planet.
Yeah.
There is no sport where the balance of your progress is more equated in your recovery than CrossFit. But yeah, so beds, and then you had things like sleep temperatures, grounding. So grounding the beds. Many of the athletes had beds, because you're sleeping in a house, and a house is on different levels, and you're not on the ground. But humans have slept on the ground for millennia, and that's the norm.
I remember hearing this for the first time. This is like the third time
like
I've
voodoo,
heard this, but it's like sounds like witchcraft, like a tinfoil hat story. But
except when you're at that level of trying to get the most out of your body's performance, and then you really start thinking about it, and then you also end up eventually noticing the results. And again, we're noticing, little tiny movements in the needle that people don't pay attention
percentage
to.
over percentage.
Yeah.
As a lifestyle, you can tune into those things. But negative ion grounding is a thing. It's very real. We exchange ions with the ground and the earth because we slept on the ground for 99% of the existence of human beings on this planet have slept on the ground, except for modern times where we sleep in a bed on a floor above ground. And so as part of that recovery, the athletes would have silver, like their fabrics would be lined with silver, and then they'd have a cord come in out the end of the fabric, and that cord would go out the window and down and would be staked into the ground, 6 feet into the ground.
So wild.
Yeah, so their beds were grounded and could exchange ions. And that was a real thing and not kooky.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody did it.
So sleep. And then what was your food like? Because I've talked to you about this before.
Gosh.
And just knowing you as a human, obviously, like the amount that you can eat and still be, you're very lean just naturally. In order to train for hours and hours a day, like you have to be just pumping fuel into your body at all times.
Yeah, and everybody's a little different. The decathlon was certainly very demanding, more so than other events. But my food intake was insane. And living with 12 athletes that were very food driven and supplement driven was hilarious. We ended up in this giant mansion in Stockton, California, like the home of the foreclosure capital of the world at the time. It was where we were living, and we had to move our training facilities. We were training on an island called Twitchell Island in California, and then the real estate bust happened. We had to move off that island, and the real estate mogul that had us kind of set up in a training center folded. So the city of Stockton, California gave us an old military warehouse that was basically like 3 or 4 football fields large of a building with these giant doors that opened up.
So cool.
It was called Rough and Ready Island. It was a military island in Stockton. They gave us that building to train and to finish up the year going into the Olympics. So then we all moved to Stockton and got a giant house and lived together. So that was the majority of the living together that was done. Mm-hmm. And the house that we got was just giant mansion, and it had this pantry, the size of a living room. And all the shelves in the pantry, we put tape down the shelves and divided them for each athlete.
Oh, really?
Yep. And then it literally looked like walking into a GNC. Like each athlete had all their supplements, on the shelves and all the specialty food.
You guys have like 10 refrigerators?
We did have a couple refrigerators.
I can imagine that's what like the majority of the drama in the house revolved around. Joe,
like
you touched my whey protein. Yeah. I know you did it.
You know what's funny is never like people
you don't
were
even like
so
EAS.
people were so particular and like nobody would cross that line.
Okay.
Okay.
That was like the
don't mess with people's performance.
Don't touch
that
my
made me
house.
just think like that'd be a great show, Olympic House or something like that.
Yeah, like a Big Brother style.
Oh my gosh.
Because the egos and the things going on, there had to have been a lot of
like everybody is an
everyone
alpha.
had a huge ego.
Everybody's an alpha. You have to be.
I always tell people that ego and arrogance are two different things. We think ego means arrogance, but ego isn't. An ego out of check is arrogant, but an if you're going to be the best in the world at something, you have to have one of the biggest egos around. It's just how you check it and how you qualify it and how you filter it that determines if people think you're an a-hole or not. Which happens for sure. It's hard to check an ego that big, but I was fortunate in my career as a track athlete and now as a CrossFit owner to not have to deal with arrogant people.
Nice.
But egos are necessary. Awesome. You still got to have a big ego.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how many calories do you think you were consuming a day?
So towards the end of my career, as I really started to get more into understanding that side of it and having a coach who understood it, we realized when I went to the Olympic Training Center for a testing protocol where they do all the kind of stuff that you picture from a Rocky IV movie where they're like testing the athletes and have cords and wires all over them. We would have sessions. We would go do that kind of stuff. And then one of the side things was getting body fat tested in an actual like dunk tank, you know, the real hydrostatic body fat testing.
It's rough.
Yeah. It's blowing all the air out of your lungs to the very last degree.
And then put in the water.
Going underwater.
It's crazy.
You have no oxygen at all, and yet you're sitting in a tank underwater.
Yeah, that's wild.
With tubes like in your mouth. So doing that, my body fat came back at 5.3%, and that's an extremely accurate test. Like anytime you hear football players like saying they're at 3%, that's actually baloney. Like, the truth is
somebody said DK Metcalf was like negative 2%.
Negative.
Do you remember? Wasn't it Ronnie Coleman was on Joe Rogan?
Yeah, he said he was.
One time, somebody told me that I had negative 2% body fat.
So it doesn't even make sense.
And I just walked around like that.
Yeah, and Joe like tried to call him out, but he was just like, I'm not even gonna bother.
I'm just gonna let it go.
Yeah.
Basically under 5, you start having problems.
Like hormone issues and stuff.
And myelin sheath.
Like muscle tissue issues.
Yeah, like nerve issues and things like that. And as much as I was training, one of the cool things that happens too is when you get towards a peak, like a performance peak, like a U.S. championships, Olympic trials, or Olympic games, your body will naturally lean out. Like there's changes that happen to your body that have nothing to do with your training, that have to do with literally the psychological honing towards an event.
You told me about this when I was cutting weight, or like when we would be like getting ready for regionals. Like I would just naturally lean out, but I wouldn't. At first, I was like, "What? Like that doesn't even make sense." But then, like leading into like when we went to Nashville, it was like I was 6 or 7 pounds lighter than my normal training weight, and I hadn't changed anything. In fact, I probably was eating more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and cortisol levels go up. That's why athletes that are heading into a big competition are complaining more about joints hurting and things like that. Nothing's actually changed in their injuries or their body, but the cortisol levels are higher.
Yeah, that's why I always feel awful going into competition.
Yeah. Yep. So my coach was like, hey, we got a problem here because you're a 5.3% body fat. And by the time we get to Olympic trials, you're going to be in a problem zone. So we need to start eating more. So at that point, I already ate a lot, but every week we would add a couple thousand calories to my daily
Just
intake.
A couple thousand. Quick couple thousand.
Yeah. And I got up to around 10,000 calories a day.
Yeah.
What was your staple to increase calories? Like, did you have like a...
It's got to be fat. It had to.
I was going to say like a
nut
peanut
butters
butter
and oils.
Yeah, I have nutter butters in my shopping bag.
There we go.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I can see them right now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a throwback. I haven't eaten those in forever. But yeah, it would be, you're basically like mass gainer shakes. Like you have like the caloric intake shakes, but then breakfast was huge, like incredibly huge. You ask what it's like living with athletes, it's like a breakfast restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody's eating that meal and
especially
focusing
because
on
that's your training fuel, most likely for your main session.
The stage, yeah. And you've just come off of sleep, and that whole business about Olympians waking up at 6 a.m. is baloney. Like nobody does. Everyone sleeps until they wake up. So, yeah, that whole crap about hitting the alarm clock at 5 a.m. No,
unless
that's not
if you
Olympic
do that
thing.
and you like go quick do some and then you come back
You
and
like
fall asleep for
again.
4 more hours.
So yeah, we would all get up kind of around 7, 8 in the morning, and then breakfast would take till 9. Just cooking everything. So yeah, I would have a dozen eggs and a bunch of meat and oatmeal and yogurt and cereal, a couple bowls of cereal, and that would be that takes you an hour.
No kidding. And then to digest before you actually train all of that food. Oh my gosh.
And so then I would train, and then I would have to take a break in my training every couple hours to drink one of these shakes that had all these, like 1,500 calories per shake usually.
Yeah, it's wild.
We did that for months, and I gained like a pound a week. In muscle mass, and like got balanced out and got my body fat
Joe got
slightly
thick.
up.
Yeah. Well, actually, even just talking about like post like Joe being a decathlete, like when you were pursuing as a master's athlete, there's years ago, actually, a buddy of mine sent a picture of me. And he was like, dude, Joe's a beast. It was like 2017 or 16 when you were making a run for like the master's qualifier. And you had said that you were like eating like you were back in the day, and you were training, 2 sessions a day. And yeah, you probably had at least 15 pounds then on you are now, like where you're at now.
Yep.
Yeah. It's wild.
Yeah. So, that was the food portion, and everybody was eating very clean and eating high level nutrition, supplementing a lot with that. Because at that level of training, you can't do it with just food.
Yeah.
You just can't.
But at the same time, like, speaking of like Nutter Butters, you're not going to add 2,000 calories a day in chicken breast and broccoli.
True.
Like there comes a point where if you need calories, you need dense, caloric foods, and whether it's a shake or it's a peanut butter scoop with some Nutter Butters, like it is what it is at that point. You just need fuel.
Rob Wolf was just on Ben Bergeron's podcast, and he was talking about like he breaks down all the things, and he's like, paleo doesn't even really work that well for high level athletes. Like at a certain point, like your body needs a certain amount of carbohydrates, and you cannot like eat clean in order to get the amount that a elite level CrossFitter
Dan
or
Bailey said that,
like marathon runner needs
years ago. Yeah, you can't get all your calories from chicken and broccoli. It's true though. Like, I mean, if you're training at that level, there's no way.
It's interesting how, like, if you were to have a conversation without the context of knowing someone is an Olympian, the line between being like mentally ill compulsive and like elite performer is so thin.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I was going to ask about the mental side next of these athletes, and then trying to transition out of that world into what you call like civilian life.
To piggyback even onto what you just said, I mean, I had a therapist friend that I was speaking to years after the decathlon and dealing with some things in my life. And one of the breakwater moments for me was hearing him say, Joe, do you really believe that training 6 to 8 hours a day, 6 days a week for 10 years is healthy?
Yeah.
That you really believe that that's a healthy mind that was able to do that? He said, no, you were simply doing something incredibly unhealthy that was being rewarded and approved by the society.
Yeah.
Like we reward that behavior by calling them Olympians and putting a wreath around their head and giving them a medal over their neck. But there's nothing mentally healthy about that pursuit. Other than it's pursuing something healthy in an unhealthy way. I guess maybe the better word to say is it's not balanced.
No.
It's not a balanced life in any way, shape, or form.
But you can't be balanced if you're going to pursue that level of success.
Absolutely not. Yeah, you cannot be balanced.
And I would bet that probably translates to a lot of things, not just in sport as well. I mean, you look at these business moguls.
Sure.
Like they didn't get there from working, 8 to 4, going home and whatever. Like
putting other people first.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's so much sacrifice and so much that you don't see that is unhealthy habits that got them to the success, and then they make money and whatever.
Absolutely.
Or get a medal around their neck.
There are elements of obsession that involve pursuing greatness like that.
So what was it like getting out of that world and re-entering like normal life? How was that transition?
Oof. Well, it was rough. I mean, first of all, you've been living with people pursuing greatness, and we talked about what that looks like and what that kind of human being looks like and how exciting and amazing and interesting they are. But they're also, and this is a side note too, they're people who have mastered delayed gratification. And I think one of the biggest differences that separates an Olympian from a normal civilian is the Olympian's capacity for delayed gratification. They have had to see a goal ahead of them that might be 4, 6, 8, 10 years away, and they've given up things in the short term for that long-term goal. And most of the people that I knew that ever had a medal hung around their neck delayed their gratification better than their competitors. Set up goals and processes and ways to achieve the end goal that restricted their performance in those years leading up to it. So one of the best quotes I ever heard is, you can never be as good as you'll ever be by being as good as you can be. Like if I'm just going to be as good as I can be this year, I'll never be as good as I could be.
That's interesting.
10 years down the road. And so learning that was a big part of learning the mind of an Olympian.
Yeah, I can only imagine like having that conversation with your coach as well, being like, hey, we're not going to go for medals or anything this year. We're just going to
Or next year.
Yeah,
or
or
the
the
year
year
after
after.
that.
You're going. Well, that's what my coach said to me. You're going to get beaten by your competitors for the next 3 years, so that you can beat them in the 4th year. And
Yeah.
not many people are willing to do that. Most people want the approval and to see how good they can get every year, but that's just like treading water. We had that with CrossFit early on in the
Yeah.
early years of CrossFit as a gym when we were competing at regionals, where I had to say to the athletes, hey, we've got a lot of work to do to become a great regional team. We're going to get beat by the other gyms in the area until they won't beat us anymore.
Sure.
And getting the athletes to buy into that, and sure enough, that's what happened, is eventually we had built a base that allowed us to then perennially beat all the other gyms
Yeah.
in the area. But that didn't happen at first, and that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Especially in an ego-driven, sport, or I guess confidence-driven sport as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's not fun for an alpha athlete to put their ego aside and take 5th place when they think they should be taking 1st.
Yeah.
Like, that's not fun.
Yep. And so what that looks like is you might spend a year on just technique development.
Sure.
And you're not working any on your speed and power, because
Yeah.
you know that technique is the gateway for that speed and power to get through to the implement. So you're spending it on technique, and you're not getting strong and powerful. And then the next year you're spending it on just, speed development, and then strength, and then the 4th year you're putting it all together,
Yeah.
performing.
That's neat. It's all big pieces to a very long puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
I have to wrap this up because I have a hard stop. But I guess another thing in the future, maybe in a few episodes or further down the line, I would like to talk business. I think would be pretty neat. And I think Joe has a lot of insight, obviously, just like to the gym business in general. But I would like to know what it was like to work with, and again, this is for a future episode, to work with the business owners or the coaches at the highest level that you trained with as well. Because I think a lot of that probably translated to how you run your business now, and how you're able to help other businesses like ours maybe get better or survive, I guess, in the world that we're living in now. But you got anything else?
No, I just like to sit back and listen.
Yeah, sponge.
I always, with like you and Fred, it's I even struggle to come up with questions half the time because you guys are just full of stuff, and I can just listen to you talk.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks for coming on again.
You bet.
Yeah.
We'll see. Is he
We'll
going to
see.
break his
Season
old
2?
record?
Yeah, we'll see.
That's what we got to see. So,
Awesome. Well, we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Bourbon and Balance Boys out. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you, the listeners, so much for listening to the show. We really appreciate every single person that tunes in each and every week. And if you're enjoying the content that we're putting out, please help us organically grow the show by liking, commenting, sharing, and saving our social media posts. If you do as many interactions as possible on our social media posts, that helps other people who don't see our content see it more easily on social media, kind of cheating the algorithm. So once again, thank you so much for listening, and stay balanced.